So I'm just doing the price action video for yesterday, January 14th, 2025, Tuesday, core PPI, high impact news driver, weekly time frame. This week we tapped into this weekly order block, daily time frame. We tapped into the daily SIBI, the 50% of it coming down to the 50% of this daily wick, using it as support. And then this was so yesterday, Tuesday, we had this opening range gap higher, and then we closed it. Okay. And then this is what it looks like pretty much on the 5 minute time frame. Opening range gap high is the orange line. Middle consequent encroachment is the orange dotted line. Opening range gap low is this orange line. And then these two thinner dotted lines are the upper quadrant, lower quadrant of the opening range gap. So, we opened and then we tapped at the 50% of the daily SIBI and then displacing down, closing the opening range gap completely, come back up, 5 minute fair value gap, and then displacing down for kind of until we take out the susside liquidity below here and then tap into the 50% of this daily wick. Okay. And then this is what it looks like on the 1 hour time frame. Again, this shaded box with the is a new day opening gap. Keep that in mind. This is the low, the daily SIBI, the daily fair value gap, and then the white dotted line is 50% of it, and then the blue line right there is Friday's first presented fair value gap. Okay. And then nonetheless, again, like I mentioned, these orange levels are the opening range gap levels. And then jumping into the 5 minute time frame on electronic trading hours, we opened, okay, and then we immediately tapped and went higher, taking out the buy side liquidity over here, tapping into the 50% of the daily SIBI, coming down, closing the opening range gap completely, just coming back up, and then into this 5 minute fair value gap, and then displacing, and then staying below the consequent encroachment of the opening range gap, and then displacing downwards some more, tapping into the consequent encroachment of the daily wick, 5 minute fair value gap, and then we essentially came up and went higher, and then again, the shaded box, the white dotted line is the new day opening gap. Used it as resistance in line with the lower quadrant of the opening range gap to displace lower, taking out sell side liquidity. And then this 1 hour, this box is a 1 hour fair value gap, 1 hour inversion fair value gap right there. So we tap into it there, and then we went higher. And then just real quick on the 1 minute time frame, I'll get into all this price action on the 1 minute, but so 1 minute time frame, okay, opening range gap right here. Nasdaq opened, comes down, okay, and then fills and taps into the consequent encroachment of the opening range gap that opened for Tuesday's price action, so that same day. And then coming up, and then this is the daily SIBI, daily fair value gap level, coming up, blue line, blue box, Friday's first presented fair value gap, white dotted line, 50% of the daily fair value gap, displacing, um, leaving this, an entry here for a fair value gap. Okay, that's a silver bullet entry. And then we have this 1 minute SIBI drawdown in time. It's good to have on your chart as well. This just stares at you in the face. And then nonetheless coming displacing down. And obviously ICT was pointing this out to us, and same with the first present fair value gap. If you know, you know. Shout out to ICT. Um, so 1 minute. So again, just real quick, we opening range gap opened price action 9:30 a.m. Eastern, coming down, consequent encroachment of the opening range gap, coming higher, Friday's first presented fair value gap, 50% of the daily fair value gap displacing downside, 1 minute fair value gap displaced to the downside again, taking out sell side liquidity, consequent encroachment of the opening range gap, lower quadrant of the opening range gap, and then completely closing the opening range gap for the day, and then filling and closing this BISI, sorry, expansion to the upside after closing opening range gap to then tap into the lower quadrant of the first presented fair value gap. And ICT was telling us as well, this could have easily just taken out buy side liquidity above here. So, in this case, the search and destroy or seek and destroy, search and destroy from Call of Duty, I guess, but seek and destroy 1 minute time frame inversion fair value gap after taking out buy side liquidity and tapping into the first presented fair value gap for Friday displacement. 1 minute fair value gap in here, you can see it, and then respecting the 1 minute SIBI right there, displaced to the downside. And then we have ourselves this 1 minute fair value gap as well, displacing to the downside as well, coming into the closure of the opening range gap for the day, taking out sell side liquidity. And then as well, 1 minute fair value gap right there. It's a beautiful entry. You could have gone in line with this was the new day opening gap. So in line with the new day opening gap, displacing to the downside and then making its way down to the 50% of the daily wick that I showed you guys. 1 minute inversion fair value gap, 1 hour, sorry, inversion fair value gap right there. And then this was a 5 minute, if I'm not mistaken, fair value gap. Let's just see. No, yeah, so this is a 5 minute fair value gap right there. Okay, 5 minute fair value gap, 1 minute BISI. Okay, displacement just after we take out the sell liquidity and tap into the displacement right there, breaking above market structure right there, low, high, lower, low, breaker pattern as well. Um, and then taking out sell liquidity as well. And then so take out sell liquidity, break above market structure, retrace down into the BISI, high probability entry, expansion, fair value gap in there, and then making its way up to the new day opening gap and the lower quadrant of the new range opening gap for the day, which is the thin orange dotted line. Displacement to the downside, beautiful entry right here. That is a nice entry right there. And then displacement to the downside market maker sell model, taking out sell liquidity for the day, and then, doing its thing over here, fair value gap right there. Okay. Expanding to the upside, 1 minute, couple volume imbalances in there, expansion to the upside.